This is Goose Pond In, the jumpiest stage in the East Coast. Stage 12, 4.73 miles, and tons of fun. It's starting to drizzle, but it hasn't been drizzling much, so it shouldn't affect conditions more than damp, which we already had right before. Thank you. 30 seconds. See you guys. Once again, right 6 into crest 50, left 4 over crest, kings 150. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Crest 50, left 4 over crest 150. Left 4 plus 70. Stay left over crest 100. Stay left over crest into right 6 plus, into right 4 plus over small crest. Into left 6, 70. Left 4 plus over crest loose. Right 6 over small crest long, 70. Stay left over flat small jump, 50. Right 5 plus short into left 6 over kick. Right 5 minus over small jump into left 5 plus over small crest, 50. Caution big jump, 30. Left 6, tightens 5 minus. Right 6, 30. Right 4 plus, no cut. Into left 4 minus, 50. Right 5 plus, 50. Flat jump 70. Left 6 opens over small crest 70. Right 4 minus. Left 4 plus long. Flat small crest 70. Small crest into right 6, 120. Flat crest 100. Brake right 3, 100. Repeat, flat crest 100, brake right 3, 100. Small crest left 3. Repeat, small crest into left 3. Right 3 plus, 50. Small crest into left 5, tightens 4. Into right 3 plus over small jump, tightens. Into left 3 plus. Flat jump, 50. Left 5, 50. Jump, 30. Right 5 plus over small crest, long over small crest. 50, left 6, small crest, 30. Right 5 minus. Caution 30, small crest into right 4 short over jump. These two cautions, right 4 short over jump into a left 3 minus over kick. Into right 4 plus over small crest. Into left 6 short over kick. Into right 6 plus, 70. left 6 plus over small crest 70, bridge 120. Right 6 over small crest, left 6, big cut 200. Left 6, big cut 200. Caution, small crest into left 5 minus, into right 6, slow over jump. Repeat, left 5 minus, into right 6, slow over jump. 50, left 5 plus, over small crest, into tightens 4, no cut, into right 4 plus, over small crest, left 6 over small crest, caution right 4 plus, over small jump, tightens 3, stay out, into left 3, jump, into left 5 minus, over small jump, right 5 plus, triangle, over small crest, repeat right 5 plus, over small crest, double caution, stay left over big jump, right 4 plus, into left 4 over small crest, no cut 30, right 3, no cut, 50, right 5 over crest tightens, left 5 short over small crest into left 4 tightens, into right 5 minus loose starts, 30, left 4 plus, into right 5 short, into crest, into left 4, into caution right 3 over small jump, left 4 over small jump, into right 5 plus short, into caution left 6 over jump 50, jump 70, right 6 plus over jump, slow over double small jumps, stay left over jump, over into small jump 30, jump 150. Left 6 plus, into right 3 tightens, into finish, left 6 plus 100. Good job.
Whoosh.
Whoosh indeed.
Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh.
Good job over those jumps.
Thanks. Good
Well
job, Colin.
managed.
Whoosh. Wow.
Oh, there's Ari.